everyone. Welcome back to the Earth Dawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices and masters alike. I am Dan. My co-host is, of course, Earth Dawn line developer Josh Harrison.
Hi, everybody.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things magical, mechanical. I think today, in fact, is going to be...
Geographical.
Geographical. Thank you for that one. And biological. We'll cover dwarves
there you go.
A little bit later on. So, yeah, we'll go from there. Those two things. We actually have some email to get to first. People did contact us, amazingly enough, at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. So if you'd like to join them and have your name read aloud on the air, I don't know, then we'll get to it. But otherwise, we've got, I think, 3 or 4 to get to. So, Josh, who got a hold of us first?
Well, we've got another email from Brian, who had sent us an email before. And this one is, he was the one who had asked the question about Flame Flash a couple of episodes ago.
Oh, yes.
And he replied, thank you for answering the question. And mentioned that while I pointed out a limiting factor on the spell was the close range, the wizard in question was a windling. So that kind of changes the range calculations a little bit. You still need to get close, but you can do it close from up above.
Absolutely.
But he does have a follow-up question, which I indirectly answered in our previous episode. He was writing to seek pronunciation clarification. He really liked the pronunciation thing that we did a couple of episodes ago.
The only comment we've had on it so far.
Yeah. How do you pronounce the life rock the name of the life rock that the Triumph landed on? And I had been, because we discussed it at the end of the history section,
yes,
the timeline section, that I have been pronouncing it Ayodhya, because I believe the spelling is Ayodhya.
Yeah.
I believe that's the, I actually don't have my PDF up on my screen here to actually check it real quickly, but I see you're flipping in your book.
Yeah. If I can get the shadows out of the way, I can find that. So, follow the thing.
But I have always pronounced it Ayodhya.
I'm with you on that one. It looks like it should be pronounced that way. So Ayodhya sounds right to me as well.
Aha! I had Prelude to War actually closer than anything else.
Love that.
Let's see.
Okay, yeah. Ayodhya.
Hya. Yeah, I did have this. Yep, Ayodhya.
Yeah. Yeah, I do the same thing. Ayodhya is exactly how I pronounced it. Always have.
So that's, I mean, I mentioned it, we mentioned it a couple of times at the end of the history chapter, the history section 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
And so, so I indirectly answered the question, but I did want to, thank him for the email and just reiterate specifically that that's what it was.
And oddly enough, we both agree on the pronunciation of a made-up word. So
there we go. Who's next?
Cool. I've got one from Lars. I'm pretty sure it's not Lars Ulrich, the only Lars I've ever heard of.
It is.
Probably not.
It is not.
So,
Lars
hi, Josh.
Ulrich.
Yeah, in your podcast, you state that threads represent the fuel or power for a spell and is not, emphasis, part of the spell pattern. Does it mean one cannot yet determine which spell is prepared when the caster is thread weaving?
No, I don't actually think it means that at all. Because each of the spells in its description has has actions that need to be performed.
Yeah.
So, verbal, somatic, gestures, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I would think that generally speaking, it is possible for a spell that is being cast to be identified ahead of time, especially if it is one that requires threads to be woven. There aren't really hard and fast rules about it, but I would consider spellcasting to be something that is obvious, and with experience and knowledge, adepts would be able to, maybe learn what spells do ahead of time, or what, what they can see that, their spellcaster who's got this kind of embroidered leaf and vine motif on his robes has just picked up a handful of dirt and did some gestures, and they flung crystal darts at us.
Yeah.
Therefore, we know now that that's he's probably an elementalist, and that's an earth dart spell. Obviously now, with that being a 0 thread spell, you can't really do much about that. But spells that are a little bit longer take some preparation. how much of a stickler the GM might be in terms of, in order to cast a spell, you need to be able to perform these specific motions. I leave that up to individual tables. But for the most part, spell casting should be identifiable. It's just that I don't know that necessarily looking at a spellcaster astrally and the gathering of energies that is happening there is something that would necessarily identify the spell. Although I would probably allow somebody with pattern craft to make a test to identify at least, what discipline of magic it might be from or something along those lines.
Yeah, I have no objection to anything you said. Not that I have any grounds to dismiss anything you said. But I agree that if you've seen this spell cast once or twice, like Earth Darts is pretty simple, or Dry and Wet from a Nethermancer, or something that's really obvious, that these motions that they have to go through, I would say, if you've seen it once or twice, you can kind of tell again if you've paid any kind of attention to it whatsoever, or if you have the natural inclination to say, I was hit with that spell the last time. I don't want you to do that again. I will pay attention to that.
Right.
Like if the wizard, pulls back Mind Dagger, you're not hitting me with that. I'm going to, throw my Steel Thought up if I can. So
sure,
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is an opportunity missed if you are not doing some kind of descriptive flair with regards to what's happening during the course of round to round activities in combat. We can actually maybe stick a pin in that as a future topic to discuss, like when you're doing like a combat and when you're running a situation like that, how to spice it up a little bit and not just turn it into a roll. Oh, you hit, roll, here's your damage, and going on from there. And to play around with maybe how you can use the die results to influence the narrative of the scene and maybe a little bit of vice versa. So
I do know a stickler GM that if your spell has those certain components where you need to act them out, he makes the player act them out. So if you need to make a noise, if you need to do the gestures, he makes them get up and actually do that. So like I said, I know a stickler GM, only one, but he will actually make the players do what their character is going to do as far as that is concerned. So,
I like describing how my casters do their stuff. Anybody who's listened to the Legends of Earthdawn podcast, the actual play show that I'm part of, will have noticed that there will be times where I will describe and add some stuff that's not necessarily from the book description, but that is developed as kind of the flavor for Virag's spell casting and stuff like that. So
yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, and that's just adding flavor to the game around your table. So I'm all for those. Who else do we have?
We've got another email from Ian. He's the one who sent the email where we had the really long discussion about the decline of magic. It was a great discussion. We got actually some good comments online about that. Lou Prosperi actually, and said found that it was a really interesting kind of discussion, even though it doesn't necessarily pertain specifically to your typical Earthdawn play. But a lot of interesting ideas kind of came out of that. He had a follow-up on that from something that I mentioned. Well, yes. So I'm not going to go through his whole email. He appreciates us taking the time. One final follow-up. He said it doesn't have to be answered on the air, but I think other people might find it interesting. Where can I find source material about the Therans/Immortal Elves hitting pause on the mana cycle? This was something. It was not exactly a throwaway comment, but it's something that I have internalized so much as part of my understanding of what's going on that I sometimes forget that not everybody is aware of this. This is something that was starting to be hinted at early or at the very tail end of the first edition run. And some of the stuff that was kind of going on with that. If you look at some of the notes from the original Barsaive at War outline that has been posted and is available online if you look for it, and some other things, basically we discover that under the city of Vivane, there is what's called a locus, Locus, which is something that also I think maybe was making appearances and references in some Shadowrun stuff around that same time. But the idea being is that it's basically a gigantic enchanted chunk of orichalcum that was located not only under Vivane but under a bunch of other places as well, that was serving as a web to artificially maintain the mana level, so that the Theran Empire could hold their power. And one of the things that happened is that when the horror cloud hit Vivane, that basically the magical feedback into that locus caused all kinds of problems and a backlash to Great Thera, the island, and some other problems elsewhere. So it was something that was being hinted at, and Lou had talked about it in some of his discussions elsewhere, that basically, and presumably, although this has never been 100% confirmed, the orichalcum pillars on Great Thera are also tied into this. So it's basically that they have a gigantic regional, if not global, network of enchanted deposits of orichalcum, basically artificially maintaining the mana cycle.
I can't see why they wouldn't. That sounds like something.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's I could probably go on for a while about all of these sort of comments and sidebars, and especially if we get into the dragons and things like that that could be involved there. But that's the basic answer. Is it's not really talked about in any of the books per se. It's kind of in supplemental materials and has been confirmed. And as far as I am concerned, that's a pretty good way to approach it.
That sounds good to me. That's more hidden knowledge than I had. So love it. Thank you, Ian, again, for the discussion last time and the answer this time. So the last email we've got actually here is from Stephen. He's returning to Earthdawn after a nearly 20-year absence due to family and work. So he's skipping from 1st edition to 4th edition. Welcome back, Stephen. Happy to have you.
Yes.
He's actually found a potential group and he's pulling a game together. Awesome. Love it. Spread the word. Ideas from Earthdawn have percolated in the back of my mind for years, mostly from hooks on the 1st edition core books. The one I'm going to run with is the missing Eyes of the Four Founders, taken from the Tiskrang holy site on the pilgrimage route. What he'd be interested in hearing about on the podcast is what adventure or story hooks do you remember in the early books that either never got expanded on in later canon or that you used in your own games?
Well, I do know that probably one of the more popular ones that sort of got followed up and sort of didn't and whatnot is the long-term fate of Ardelia, who first appeared in Infected.
Yes.
It's a great adventure, by the way. Very sort of atypical in terms of its approach. It is very investigative and social, and not a lot of combat, which makes sense because it's written for a couple of for a relatively lower circle group, and the opposition is higher circle. The Neithermancer that's head of the Grim Legion group is like 6th or 7th circle, something like that. Anyway, Ardelia then made, in the aftermath of that adventure, Ardelia and the village of Honto, where she was from and infected, make appearances in a couple of other places. And one of the major plot arcs in Prelude to War involves the Therans, one Theran wizard in particular, doing basically abducting her and delivering her into Theran hands. And within the 1st edition, that was more or less the end of her story. That there were plans for that to continue, but the 1st edition line shuttered before they could do anything with it. There was something that was done with that under Living Room Games 2nd edition. I forget exactly which book it was in, but they kind of brought her back. I know that there are a lot of long-running campaigns that had dealt with her, that had her coming back. And while 4th edition has not had her return, I will say it has not had her return yet. And that is all that I will say. That is all that I will say on that matter for now.
It's not part of the big secret, but we'll leave it there. I fully admit I tried to get everyone to anyone else to run Earthdawn for me, so I always try to be a player. But since I could never get anyone to run it for me and let me play, I grabbed every pre-published adventure I possibly could. So I never actually wrote an adventure for myself to run my people in, to run my players in. So I don't have any dangling plot threads per se. So I strung together all the pre-gen adventures I possibly could. So whatever Fawcett put out, whatever anybody put out online, I ran through 15 or 16 of them. So yeah, I strung them all together as much as I possibly could. So I didn't have a lot of dangling plot lines. I threw everything at everybody just to convince them, this is a great game. Yes, run it for me. I'd like to play this, please. Thank you. So that was mine. That concludes our email. Hopefully we've answered everyone's questions. If you have any more for us, by all means, get a hold of us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll have more answers, especially from Josh, because he's vastly knowledgeable.
I'm the answer man, apparently.
You're the line developer. Why would you not be the answer man? They don't want to hear from me. This I already know. I'm just comic relief. I'm kidding. For the rest of the episode, we can talk about things geographical and biological. So we've got Bartertown. We figured out our first major geographical thing to really hone in and focus on. Bartertown in and of itself. So roughly, 40,000 people live there? No, I'm thinking of the Kingdom. I'm thinking the Kingdom of Thrall. Sorry.
Well, no, I think the numbers that are given for it, and again, I did not do a whole lot of prep for this, so I don't have figures. I think 30,000 or something was the population figure given for it. The population figures,
they come and go anyway. People move out. So
Bartertown is a.
It's not like they have a census going on.
Yeah, Bartertown is a city that sprung up just outside the gates of Thrall. Started off basically as a sort of place for merchants who didn't want to be subject to Throalic authority to dodge taxes. As so much in civilization involves trying to avoid taxes, but also the authority of the Throalic crown. And also, perhaps especially in the earlier days after the Scourge, a little bit of reluctance on the part of Thrall to allow just anybody into the city when there was still ample evidence that horrors and horror-touched folk might still be wandering around and not wanting to let that influence into the city. Or into the kingdom.
Yeah, fair. And so Bartertown is mostly, from recollection, because I crammed my study practice in about an hour ago, Bartertown is mostly where you can buy, sell, trade just about anything, and most of the city is set up for that. There's a couple of places to live, maybe stay, taverns, whatever not, but most of it is the buying, selling, and exchanging of goods.
Yeah.
People not included.
There is some of that. The line that I recall is from the original Thrall source book, and this may have been repeated in the sort of reprint or updates of that. But actually, the most common pastime in Bartertown is, and I think I quote here, pubs, taverns, and pubs.
That did not make it into 4th edition, but it is out there. Yes.
Yeah, that it is a city that sprung up as was originally from a sort of, at least always kind of intended as somewhat temporary, and so it's like ramshackle and crowded and
a shanty town.
Yeah. I mean, there maybe are, better parts of it, but it is it's a Mos Eisley, I think is perhaps a good way to maybe draw a comparison. Is that, and it is in its own kind of way a hive of scum and villainy.
There you go, folks. Josh's first movie reference for Earthdawn. So.
And in the best way, of course, because places like that are places where you can have a lot of interesting NPCs and adventure hooks and things like that. The advantage that Bartertown has as well, being just outside the gates of Thrall, not just being technically not under Throalic authority, is also that it is outside. And so it is easier to deal with things there than it is perhaps with stuff that's deeper into the kingdom, where you might have to take several hours walk in the not necessarily claustrophobic, but I mean it's a care. It's a it's
a cave system.
It is a well made, and they have done everything they could to make it enjoyable, but it's still an underground cave system. We're talking Moria really more than something else, but still there's that. And and then with the presence of the Grand Bazaar just inside the gates, that's basically like the Bartertown and the Grand Bazaar between them. If you can't get it there, you can't get it anywhere.
Agreed. It's all for sale there, except slaves.
Except slaves.
Yes, because once you bring
at least
the kingdom,
yeah, because even in Bartertown, slavery is strongly frowned upon for the primary reason that it would draw the attention of Thrall. It would draw Throalic intervention.
Yes, even though Bartertown does not actually have any law, air quotes, as maintained by the government of Thrall, they have it's not magistrate I'm looking for is the wrong word, but they have something.
No, magistrate. Yeah, magistrate actually is his title.
Ah, good. Okay, I got one word. Yes, Magistrate Clystone right now is the guy in charge, and he's more just a mafia don who does what he wants, and he's in charge for now.
And he's been in charge. He's been in charge for a while.
Yes.
He is an illusionist. He's not a particularly, as I seem to recall, he's actually not a particularly high circle illusionist.
And even if he's not, he hasn't practiced in a while, so
yeah.
He can still do it if he needs to, but
right. He's not really actively pursuing his discipline to any great extent, but he is interested in maintaining his comfort and basically, like thinking of him as kind of a mafia don is not a bad analogy.
Yeah, that's kind of how I always portrayed him. Didn't use him much, but just had that feeling of, it's not really the law, quote unquote. The royal guards aren't going to come into Bartertown unless they desperately have to. Only if there's like a major fire again. But other than that, it's just, it reminds me of the private security force kind of in Shadowrun all around Seattle, which, they can be bought if you if you have enough money to go, hey, there's no crime here. Here's some coin. Go away. And they might do so because they get paid.
Give them their cut.
Exactly. Give them their cut and they'll turn the other cheek, turn a blind eye to whatever you're doing. So, Bartertown has this, and I'm going to make a reference as well. If you watch the original pilot episode for Firefly and they land on Persephone, after they talk to Badger and they get out, they're walking through this maze of people and stalls and performances and food vendors and so forth. And so it's a Renaissance fair on steroids. And so there's everything possible there. But the key geographical part of Bartertown is they have one road, the Royal Road.
There's the one major road.
And then otherwise they have lanes. And so it's
lanes and alleys.
Yeah. So it reminds me of it's just a big straight up and down road. No twists or turns to it. Leads straight up to the gates of Thrall, and then everything branches off of there pretty much in a right angle, left angle.
Yeah, so it's another sort of visual reference, although this is more sci-fi, but I'm thinking of the like street level stuff from the original Blade Runner when Decker is going through the sort of like with all the close quarters and lots of people and like noodle carts and stuff like that. I could like that as a fantasy image could work really well for Bartertown as well, or any kind of like cyberpunky kind of like, again, I kind of talk about like Mos Eisley or any of the other like, places like that are all appropriate imagery.
We've given you three good references. If those don't work, we're out of luck. So but I think we've covered. That's Bartertown. So that's kind of how the people work.
Bartertown is actually a pretty good place to perhaps have as a hub or base of operations for your group if your game is going to be having one. Primarily because it is centrally located and it is right outside of Thrall. So there is a lot of reasons for anybody to be there, from, prominent merchant princes and stuff to people looking for a score, or agents of Thera or Iopos, or cultists, both positive and negative, because it's all, again, it's like it's a central location, it's a hub. Adventurers would be and adepts would be drawn there because there is work aplenty. And it's, relatively speaking, centrally located in the province, and so it's a decent enough stopping off point. Plus, it's access to resources like the Great Library and some other stuff within the kingdom. It is definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely. The group that I'm running right now just finally returned to Bartertown after about a year's absence, traveling all over the place to Parlingth and whatnot. So they finally came back, and they have a regular stomping grounds that we just named the Red 71 Tavern, and that was it. So they have three rooms there that they maintain at all times and are always kept free. So whenever they get back into town, that's where they go. Couldn't tell you the address because Bartertown has no numbering system.
Yeah.
It's the corner of this and that. It's somewhere down that row. Go.
Yeah.
So, and bunches of back alleyways and so forth. It is a melting pot of Namegiver entity instead of humanity. And one of those. So you, like, as you said, if you can't find it in Bartertown, it doesn't exist. So
it's
cool.
It's a great little place, and different from, say, Kratos, the City of Thieves, which has its own vibe, primarily because Kratos is the ruins of a former city, whereas Bartertown is something that sort of sprung up organically, on its own, as opposed to being built in the skeleton of something from the past.
Yes. So, or a crashed, derelict behemoth, I think it was. Yeah. Cool. Wasn't Kratos... Something crashed. I think it was a behemoth. And that's where Kratos was built off of.
No, there was...
I must be remembering this wrong.
I don't know what you're referring to.
Okay.
Now, it's possible you might be referring to something within the history of Kratos from the 3rd edition book about it. And it has been a while since I've read that, but I don't remember anything like that specifically. So
it's okay. No worries. I'm probably wrong, and it's not a big deal. We're talking about Bartertown. So when we get to Kratos,
that's true. We are
we'll
talking
get there
about Bartertown.
and we'll refresh ourselves. But I think that's it. Yeah, we're good. That's a half an hour in, and we got about a half an hour left to talk about Dwarves. The one of the founding races of all of Barsaive, and I have a couple of notes that I wrote down about what we should specifically talk about on Dwarves. Dwarves, in their entirety, as a race of Barsaive, one of the 8 Namegiver races that you can play, they make up a third of Barsaive's population. And I have to remind myself of that fact every time I run the game, because I'm like, every third character I introduce, every third NPC I introduce should be a dwarf, at least of some kind.
Roughly speaking. I mean, it depends on where in the province you are, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because
it is kind of nice that in a sense, Earth Dawn establishes a setting where humans are not the majority or considered the default or dominant race.
Yes.
I think that's a nice little twist, and to make them the dwarves, the kingdom of Thrall.
And not
it's just a neat little judge from sort of standard expectations of the D&D style fantasy.
Yes, I appreciate that wrinkle aspect of humans should not be as egocentric as they are. Let's shift that paradigm and make it dwarves instead. And I appreciate that. I know no little people in real life, but I figured that would be a very cool thing to sell, is that dwarves are a third of the population, and about half of that actually live in the kingdom of Thrall.
Right.
Itself. So in those tunnels, in those caves, past the Grand Bazaar, deep inside the mountains. And it's not because they're the Tolkien dwarves that, need to be down there and eat rocks and so forth and so on. No, these are just, that's where they prefer to be. That's the kingdom that they're...
Well, I mean, there is you can tell sort of from the history and the other information in the game that there is definitely a nod to the traditional presentation of dwarves with regards to like being mountain dwellers and miners and stuff like that, but it is not, and certainly if you look at their sort of write up in the original first edition book on its own, there is not as much there that you would end up seeing with regards to the development of thrall and dwarven culture sort of as a result of that. Which really kind of is where the Earth Dawn dwarf kind of really steps out of the shadow of the typical Gimli slash, and I'm now blanking on the names of like the Bruenor Battlehammer from R.A. Salvatore's Driss novels, and
there you go, yeah, Driss Do'Urden.
What was the name of the dwarf in Dragonlance?
Couldn't tell you.
Yeah, no, I couldn't either. But like the stereotypical like, you know, wearing the horned Viking helmet and wielding the axe and being gruff and, you know, taciturn and, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
That very quickly becomes not the case with dwarves in Earth Dawn from a personality and cultural perspective. They are. It takes the idea of dwarves being miners and builders and expands that to what I feel is a kind of logical conclusion: is that they don't just build stuff; they build societies. They build, like, everything that they do revolves around building and construction and organization. And it's just that that's not necessarily physical stuff. There is social stuff and intellectual stuff as well.
Yes, they build
that goes along with
processes. That. They build forms of government. They build forms of maintaining government. They build forms of military organizations and how those should operate. And so they just like to. It's not a control issue. It's just that they know they can reason, as you said, with their intellect, how things could and should work to their most efficient, and they build those things as a social construct, as you said, but also they don't see a difference between art and construction.
There's like the lines between form and function are very blurred.
Yes.
For
one serves
the Dwarves
the
of
other.
Barsaive.
It's and I borrowed this from a comic book I read a decade or two ago, which is make it pleasing to the eye and sound to the touch. And
that's cool. I like that.
I used that for my weaponsmith when I played one, but I think that epitomizes what dwarfs do when they build anything: make it pleasing to the eye and sound to the touch, and those should intertwine more than anything else. So, as a construct that dwarfs actually live by, you've got that, but they also build. So going back to maintaining the social aspect real quick, they also have a deep commitment to building family, and that family is all blood, but they don't see a distinction between your third cousin on your mother's side and your brother. It's the same to them. Anybody of the same blood to the dwarf is the same commitment across the board. So it is to the family unit, not just the nuclear family unit, but the entire family unit that they have comes first. So if there's ever where does my loyalty lie, with my kingdom or my family, or does it lie with my city or my family, or my town and my family? Family wins with the dwarfs. That's it.
Right, but that loyalty can be extended to the larger community.
Yes.
You know, so there is that. Which you kind of mentioned, the importance of family kind of ties into something we were talking about the other time in an earlier episode with King Varulus and the line of Varulus kings, and the fact that the potion that was given to them by Icewing made them infertile and a very small family. That is, from a dwarven cultural standpoint, tragic.
Insultingly tragic.
Yeah, that this family basically died out, right? That there was not there were not, you know, children and grandchildren and cousins and also, you know, to kind of carry on that family tradition, and then it all kind of ended with Varulus the Third and Nedin.
Yes.
So yeah, no, that's a something that can perhaps inform, especially if you're playing in that sort of tail end era before we get into the new current King of Thrall, which we'll discuss a different time.
Yes, I agree. That is Greek level tragedy, especially to dwarves. That hurts them where they sit. Dwarves also, to stay along the social construct for, because this is all role playing. So we did the Windlings and exactly how they're misconstrued on occasion. So the dwarves are misconstrued on occasion as being gruff and or rude, but in Earth Dawn they are very hospitable. They take hospitality to a different level among any of the races whatsoever. They will ask about you. They will ask about your neighbors. They'll ask about your friends. They'll ask about your family. They'll ask about your extended family, your dogs, your pets, everybody. They want to make sure that you are taken care of and that everybody you know is known to them as well, so that they can think well of you and treat you like the royal guest that you are in their home.
Mm-hmm.
And so dwarves are incredibly hospitable, but they're not gruff. They just see that one word will suffice instead of 12. So they are... Brevity is the soul of wit, so therefore dwarves have a lot of wit because they are very brief in their verbal components, verbal structure to anybody else.
Yeah, there are certainly examples of that. One of the things that actually pops up in some places where other Namegiver races are talking about dwarves is, especially when dealing with Thrall, which I think has a culture that has influenced other parts of Barsaive, but is very distinctively Throalic, and I think a lot of that derives from basically the fact that you had all these people living in close proximity during the Scourge.
Yes.
But that is the idea that dwarves are also seen as like fast talking, and while not necessarily deceptive, like in terms of being dishonest, they are very sort of self-assured and like convinced of their own sort of cultural superiority in a sense, but in a different way than elves are. That I think dwarves, especially dwarves of Thrall, kind of take it for granted that, that they're great because, well, we're the Kingdom of Thrall. And yes. we, we're responsible for the Book of Tomorrow, and we sort of united Barsaive against the Therans, and we are the largest, population center and political power in the province, and we're responsible for a lot of the trade that goes on, like in conjunction with the Tiskrang. And yes. There's all these things that I think for the dwarfs kind of makes their superiority somewhat self-evident to them, and they might come off perhaps as a little bit paternal or patronizing about it, but they don't have the same kind of nose in the air noble arrogance that would typically be described for elves, particularly if you're talking about like the blood elves and the court and stuff like that.
I agree.
There's a sort of practical, like their practicality, the dwarf practicality can come across as blunt or patronizing or sort of kind of self-evident superiority to it. And I think that can rub people the wrong way.
I agree with absolutely your interpretation of the I look at dwarves as the hands-on, paternal, very what's the word I'm looking for? Practical minded dad. That's it. They look at you like, oh, you should know this. You don't know this. I will tell you about this. And you should know how to do this as well. I'll explain this to you. And
a lot of that derives from their culture of like family and trades being passed down from generation to generation within the family, that the grandchildren learning at the knees of their grandparents and things like that. That is a very like there's a tradition of history and culture and scholarship that kind of goes along with that I'll be honest, you don't see emphasized a whole lot in other fantasy games that feature dwarves, particularly the scholarship aspect of things. Elves are almost always indicated as the ones that are the real scholars and lore masters. And there is a bit more of that's in the Dwarves of Earthdawn than you see in similar games.
Yeah, so the difference I see is dwarves have always been like the friendly teacher you want to get advice from, because they know a lot and they're very grounded. Not to use a pun. Well, on dwarves,
unless you're the type who doesn't like being talked down to.
Yes, but you're going to be talked down to less than you are with an elf who is full of disdain, because they look at most other races like you're just going to be gone in 20 years and everything else, it'll be worthless to you. So I look at elves as you said, a whole lot more arrogant than dwarves.
Or there is certainly a perception of that, and one of the things that I'd kind of like to maybe throw a brief spotlight on is Earthdawn. While there are certain traditional presentations of the various Namegiver races, they are not monocultures. Like there is a lot, as a result of the Scourge and the races having to live alongside each other in the Cares, there's a lot more blending. And the stronger cultural stuff that you see is largely geographical based. Like the dwarves tend to be Throalic in nature, but that's because so much is tied into Thrall. Yes. The Tiskrang have the culture they do because they are so different and so tied to the rivers. The elves have a weird thing going on with the blood wood, and what does it mean now to be an elf, with that and whatnot. And like there's a lot of, it's not, the dwarves are this way because they're dwarves. I mean, there is, but you're not going to, like, you're going to find a mix of Namegiver races in, like a village in the plains. And that village is going to have a culture that may have aspects that are maybe more leaning one way or another, depending on the racial makeup and where they're located. Yes. But you can't say, the dwarves in this village are going to act completely different from the elves that live next door to them. Because that's not how culture works. Basically,
it's not that deep a sociological experiment. You can figure, they'll blend, they'll meld, they'll work it out.
But I mean, when we're talking about like the broad like stereotypes, there are these things that kind of inform dwarves as a culture, and dwarves tend to not get a lot of love. Like the people that like dwarves really like dwarves.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, like if you were to make a list of like the top, like the favorite, and I'm not talking about just Earthdawn, I'm talking about fantasy games in general, about like the top popular races, like, elves and half-elves.
Yeah. Way up there.
Elves and half-elves where they're available. I think the actual numbers, like if they drew they pulled the statistics for all the characters that were created on D&D Beyond, and actually humans are the actual majority, though they're like the more humans than anything else, but like elves and half-elves together outnumber the humans. But dwarves in general don't tend to get a lot of attention. And I really like the dwarves in Earthdawn. I think they did some interesting things with them. Yes. And I think that provides for some interesting opportunities.
I agree. I've, over the last 25 years, I've been involved with Earthdawn in any way, shape, or form. I have finally figured out that I could almost classify everybody I know as one of the races in Earthdawn. And my wife is a huge swimmer and absolutely loves life and loves to twirl, loves shiny, sparkly objects. My wife would be a Tiskrang. So I already know that. Reading through the description of the Dwarves again today in the Denizens of Earthdawn Volume 1, First Edition, I have come across the fact that I'm probably more dwarf than anything else as far as the personality traits are concerned, because dwarves love to give advice. And they consider that a gift. And that is what they like to, as part of their hospitality, they like to give things to everyone, gifts of anything else. but they find one of the best gifts you can give is advice for somebody else.
Which, again, can come across as patronizing.
As a little bit patronizing and arrogant, yes. A little bit conceited. But they mean it in the best possible way. My brother used to correct people on the usage of a word or pronunciation of a word, and he thought that was, well, someone else is going to make fun of them. I will not. But if I correct them, they should see that as a gift. That came off as a little bit arrogant as well.
It can.
But, that's the thing, is they like to help people in as much as dwarves can do so just with advice. They like to provide an aspect of knowledge that maybe somebody wasn't aware of before. So keep that in mind when you're playing them. One of the things about their social construct is they like to tell fables, and their fables almost always have a lesson about ethics. And so the dwarves, in their setup of the military organization, in their setup of the government, in their setup of any kind of societal structure with families, towns, communities, they like to teach an ethical way of doing things. Doesn't mean you're not going to find a dishonest dwarf. Going to happen. I play a dwarf thief.
Yeah.
So in one of my other campaigns in Earth Dawn, but they like to do that. And so these are just some of the societal constructs that dwarves have created. So I hope we've helped round out your idea of dwarves, because not all of this is in 4th edition yet, but it's getting there. So,
well, I mean, the books are available.
Yes, go find them by all means.
So we'll wrap up here really briefly to talk about numbers.
I was going to say,
especially since
we hadn't touched on the construction of dwarves as a playable race like we did windlings yet, didn't go through their karma and all that jazz.
We'll wrap up with that.
Yeah.
So dwarves are actually a little bit, again, I talked about Earthdawn dwarves being a little bit different from the stereotypical dwarf image from fantasy gaming. Yes. Dwarves get a slight penalty to dexterity, which makes sense given that they are shorter and stockier.
Yes.
In terms of 4th edition, their strength starts at average. It starts at a 10. They do get a racial trait called strong back, which means for the purposes of encumbrance, their strength is considered to be 2 points higher. Basically, the idea being that they are not necessarily any stronger, except in terms of their ability to perhaps bear loads.
Endurance, yeah.
It's sort of endurance. They get a bonus to toughness, a 2-point bonus to toughness. They started at 12, which is great for any... for any discipline.
Yes.
The interesting thing, one of the things that I like that dwarves in Earthdawn get, the 4th edition, get bonuses to both perception and willpower of +1. This actually means that dwarves can make pretty decent spellcasters.
Yes.
Which is a not atypical association that you get. Dwarves are typically presented as non-magical in the sense that they are not spellcasters. Like, they'll be enchanters and make magic items and things like that, but they are not typically viewed as real users of magic the way that elves are. And dwarves in Earthdawn have with the perception and willpower slight edges that they get on perception and willpower plus the toughness.
Yeah.
Makes them actually fairly decent spellcasters. It makes them decent they don't get a bonus to charisma, but they make decent troubadours because of their perception. They make pretty good weaponsmiths as a result of that. Archers, dwarves, if they do pursue the archer route, tend to go more crossbow than bow, just because it fits more culturally in terms of something that is constructed and put together. But that is obviously not a requirement. But and of course, they make good enough warriors and sword masters. Their dexterity means they suffer slightly at that, but their toughness means that you can put a little bit of extra oomph into your dexterity to make up for that and still be a fairly solid. Dwarves actually are pretty decent at just about anything that they might put their minds to. Yeah, I mean, I do like to. Yeah, I do like to call out the fact that those perception and willpower bonuses, and this is even true kind of going back a little bit in earlier editions, is that dwarves, had the stats to be pretty decent spellcasters if you wanted to do it. They are one of the they're one of the races whose numbers have jumped around among one of the most. from edition to edition. I think one of the problems with third edition was that they kind of ended up being, like, if you compared them to other stuff, kind of ended up making them like kind of second best to everybody else in terms of like if you were going to be a spellcaster, you would be better off doing this instead of a dwarf. If you were going to be a fighter type, you were better off playing like an orc or a troll instead of a dwarf. And we, when looking at the number balance for fourth edition, tried to put it so that there were actually things that would be desirable. And the perception bonus is basically like they are a scholarly, Thrall at least is a scholarly culture. It is a philosophical culture. It is a thinking culture.
Yes.
And, you know, they construct things, but there is that aspect of it. And then the willpower actually is not a surprise. Dwarves are typically presented as strong-willed.
Very much so. Stubborn, I think, is the word people like to use with that
stubborn.
one.
We kind of like scaled back on their highest bonuses and got rid of their worst penalties. Because I think dwarves had like a charisma penalty in some earlier editions that did not seem to play well with the idea that they were a merchant and sort of culture spreading people.
Yeah.
And so they don't have a bonus to charisma, but they no longer have a penalty anymore.
And perhaps, I think, because I've been asked the question at least by 3 different new players once upon a time, is do female dwarves have beards like they do in D&D? And I'm like, no, it's nowhere stated, and that would be the charisma penalty.
Yeah, the artwork for female dwarves that has appeared in Earth Dawn has not depicted them with beards. There has been nothing that indicates in any of the text that it's something that they have. And again, where with the understanding that really dwarves, along with with a few of the other Namegiver races, are human stock, just expressing a certain way within the magical environment.
Yes. That
they have the same kind of like facial hair situation between the genders as between men and women as humans do.
Yes.
You might see perhaps among female dwarves, while you wouldn't see the traditional full beards, or anything like that, it's certainly possible that that you might have perhaps a little bit more facial hair than the traditional like human female, but it's not something that is broad, and we're certainly not looking at like a bearded lady kind of pastiche yucky situation.
No beards on dwarf in Earth Dawn
women
canon. Yeah, no beards on dwarf women is canon, so we're good there. The only thing I want to point out, otherwise, like you said, they get a bonus to their toughness. They start with only 1 point less than an obsidian on toughness for your dwarf.
Yeah.
So they will make a stout and hardy anything, spellcaster especially. So by all means, look to dwarves a little bit. So anything about their karma modifier?
No, I mean, the karma modifier is largely based on, we kind of touched on this, I think, back when we talked about the windlings. The karma modifier is based on what their net attribute modifiers are based off of the human, basically. That the dwarves, compared to the baseline 10s across the board, have a net +3 to their attributes.
Yes.
And so consequently, that means that they have a step 4, they have the karma modifier of 4.
Yeah.
Where and so that's where that number comes from. We talked about that with karma back with windlings, and there's not really much to say about that. And that's been the case pretty much, like the changes to dwarves throughout the editions in terms of their attributes have all been, okay, how can we tweak the numbers to end up at that same like net +3 place, but give them the points where we think they should be.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to refresh everyone's memory about how the karma modifier kind of came into play. Yeah. So in case there was a comparison, if they'd listened to Windlings and then Dwarves back to back on the episodes and skip the ones in the middle, they could at least draw a comparison. So
why would people do that?
Because we're gamers and nerds and we'd like to do that.
They want to go and check out the episode that has the stuff that they're interested in. No, that's fair. That's fair.
Exactly. No, so it's just a refresher since it's been a while since we talked about that as far as production was concerned. Episodes you can listen to once they're in the can, you're all set.
Yeah.
I think that should just about cover dwarves, as I think there was only one discipline they couldn't play before, and I think no.
Dwarves did not have any racial restrictions in previous.
That's right. Humans, dwarves, and orcs
they
did not have any restrictions. Right.
Did not have any racial restrictions.
Yeah. So there were only 3 races that didn't. Sorry. Dwarves, humans, and orcs didn't have any restrictions whatsoever. So I found that cool because
elves didn't either.
Oh, right. Sorry, I was forgetting about elves. Haven't played an elf, so I forget about elves.
I mean, trolls only had a couple of restrictions, and that was largely based on like they couldn't be a thief because magic can really only do so much
for an 8'6". Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think don't remember whether a troll could be an archer. I think a troll could be an archer in first edition.
No,
they couldn't. That was the other one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
trolls in Obsidian couldn't be archers.
One of the pre-gens that I use for my demo games is a troll archer, and it's a beast.
It is, because Marcus, my former co-host, always wanted to see a troll use a massive bow and just start shooting javelins out of the string there. So with you entirely.
But we got rid of the officially the racial restrictions. Yes. There were some that like culturally may not be particularly practiced by certain races, but
it's you'll be hard pressed to find a dwarf air sailor, but they'll be there.
I would think there would be quite a number of dwarf air sailors given the connection of dwarves with
merchants, yes.
With like working together and their merchant aspects of it.
Yeah.
And again, just by sheer population. I mean, again,
Agreed.
You're talking about the most populous race, single race within the setting.
A third of the entire population. 1/3, 33%.
So there will be. I mean, there's one of the most in canon famous air sailers is Drimsby, the dwarf who's head of the air patrol in Travar.
Yeah,
and features in Terror in the Skies and in the Travar book. So
look at that nugget, Josh.
He's a dwarf air sailor. So there you go.
There you are. Okay. Yeah, coming up in just about a
wrap
full
up
hour.
our time there.
Yeah, I think we seriously have covered everything we possibly can about dwarves, family. Yeah. I think we got the whole thing covered. So that's it for us on this episode, folks. We have covered some things geographical and biological. If you have any questions about dwarves or what we covered on Bartertown, because we kind of gave an overview of that, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, Josh, for making the time today. And
thank you. Like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word. The numbers of our listenership have been slowly creeping upward, which is always great to see. And we certainly appreciate you sticking around and listening to us gabble on about imaginary stuff.
Share the word, spread the wealth, and we'll see you on the other side. So right now, time to go make your own legend.
Good night.